Here's the thing, though, that is so frustrating, and the reason why I wrote a whole book about it is that people don't turn around. They don't, because they associate it with like failure and like a lack of character and like all this stuff. And so you have movies about people climbing up Everest, and then you know, they're too slow and the weather's really bad and a blizzard has come in and blah, blah, blah. And then they're dead on the mountain because they don't turn around under circumstances that they ought to.
Hey, Luca here. Welcome to a new episode of the Refactoring Podcast, where every 2 weeks we interview a world-class tech leader. Today's episode is a bit different than usual because our guest is none other than Annie Duke, former world-class professional poker player and one of the world's top experts on decision-making. She's a bestseller author and coach of many tech founders and teams. With Annie, we talked about her journey from studying decision science to becoming a top poker player and back to decision making. We explored how to make good decisions under uncertainty, alone and in a team. And we particularly focused on quitting decisions, what makes for a good versus a bad quit, and why we are so bad at recognizing those. So let's dive right into it. But before that, if you're enjoying these interviews, consider liking this video and hitting the subscribe button. It means a lot for us. Welcome, Annie, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Annie, you're a former world-class poker player, PhD in cognitive psychology, and you're a world-renowned expert on decision-making, author of several best-selling books, and also partner at First Round Capital, where you coach founders on making the best possible decisions. So my first question is, how can I possibly not be intimidated after reading this bio?
Because I'm a goofball? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, people are always like, oh my gosh, you've done so many different things. And first of all, I'd say like I'm kind of attracted by shiny objects. Like I sort of get interested in something and I go do that. But the other thing is, like, what I would say is that I'm just like a one-trick pony. It feels like I've done a lot of stuff, but
Don't believe you.
yeah, no, it's true. The work that I did in cognitive science, that I do in cognitive science, is really all on sort of decision making under uncertainty.
Yes.
Poker is decision making under uncertainty.
Yes.
My consulting is, working with people on decision making under uncertainty. My teaching is about that topic. So, I feel like I kind of just like think about one thing all the time. So, but yeah, whatever. Like really seriously, I'm a goofball. Don't be intimidated.
Yeah, I don't believe you 100%, but I think I get what you're saying. I think one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on the show is that I've long believed that some of the greatest mental models show themselves by being 100% transferable across many different domains, right? And I think that's one of the beautiful things about how our mind works, in this case, how decisions work. So I want to ask you so many things.
Okay.
I want to start
Let's see how many of the things we get through.
Yes.
We could do an hour of lightning round.
Yes, exactly. So I would love to ask you a lot about your journey, but I will be quick. I just want to understand, how did you go from being a world-class poker player to working as a decision science expert? How did it went? What was your thought process?
Because I started in cognitive science. So right out of college, I went to UPenn. And I was getting a PhD in cognitive science. And I actually did all 5 years. I was on the job market, but I've been struggling with kind of a chronic illness that became pretty acute. And I ended up having to take some time off. So I had done 5 years worth of work. I'd been teaching undergraduates already by then, ready to go, on my way. And I was there on a National Science Foundation fellowship, and when you take time off, your fellowship takes time off too. Which was bad for me because my dad was a school teacher, so it wasn't like, hey, I'll just support you while you're getting better. So I needed money, and I started playing poker. But the thing about playing poker then, which I think it's hard for people to understand now because poker is so ubiquitous on television now, is that this was in the 90s. It was not on television. The only reason why I knew that it was something that you could do to make a living was because my brother had already been playing and had been very successful for 10 years in the game already. And I'd watched him play a lot. He brought me out to Las Vegas a couple times for trips during graduate school, when I couldn't afford my own vacations, and would give me like, a couple $100s to go play poker. So like I had some experience with it. But when I told people what I was doing, that I was playing poker, it was really like, have you thought about Gamblers Anonymous? Like people at that time didn't really understand that poker was something you could make money at. But anyway, I was playing poker in the meantime, before I went back out onto the job market, like before I recovered and got back out on the job market. And I don't know, I just like fell in love with the game, and I kind of never went back to school at that time.
Yeah.
So then I played for 18 years. I played exclusively for 8, because about 8 years in, I got asked to give a talk to a group of options traders about risk, which is really decision making under uncertainty. And at that time, I sort of merged, like I started thinking about sort of the academic side of things and poker, and how those two disciplines could really inform each other. And that first talk I gave was about risk attitudes. And then that person, Roger Lowe, who had hired me, referred me out to some other people. And just sort of organically, I ended up developing a speaking business that I was doing in parallel to the poker. And then at some point, I had this idea that I really wanted to kind of write a book that was, sort of the translation of the talks that I had been giving like onto paper, right? Like, and then the other thing is that some of the people that I was consulting for that I had been giving talks to, rather, started asking if I did consulting. And I was like, that might be interesting. Because what I found was that with the work that I was doing on the speaking and then eventually the consulting, it's a positive sum game. So if I do well, the people that I'm working for have to do well as well. Whereas poker is a zero sum game. And I just found that I enjoyed being in positive sum environments a lot better than zero sum environments. And so I kind of was finding my joy there. And so in 2012, I retired from poker, and I started focusing on a few things. One is I co-founded with my husband an organization called the Alliance for Decision Education, and we're trying to bring all of this decision science and the stuff that I do with adults into K through 12. I started doing a lot more speaking, and then shifted to, I still do speaking, but more long-term consulting with clients, first round being one of them. And then, I wrote a proposal for this book, Thinking in Bets, and Portfolio took a shot on me, and it did really well. It was a national bestseller. And then I wrote 2 more, and I'm under contract for the 4th. And and so that, and then I went back and finished my PhD. So it feels like I did the cognitive science afterwards, but that's actually where I started. And I've never really done anything else, because poker is kind of an application of that anyway.
Hey, before we continue, I want to tell you more about today's sponsor, Unblocked. Every year, Stack Overflow releases their developer survey, and year after year, the results remain the same. Most developers feel they are not as productive as they wish they could be. In the latest survey, we saw that 53% of developers get blocked every day by knowledge gaps, and 63% spend more than 30 minutes a day looking for info, and about half of them lose more than 30 minutes answering questions by others every day. This shows that the biggest challenge in software development many times is not writing code. It's gathering the right context about what code to write. And this is where Unblocked shines. It connects to all of your tools, so it answers your questions by fetching info just from everywhere. Notion, GitHub, Google Docs, Linear, Slack, you name it. And also, it's 100% plug and play. You don't need to change anything in your workflows. It immediately brings value. You can learn more at getunblocked.com. Yeah, that's what I wanted you to ask, because you said you fell in love instantly with poker. And if I have to make a guess, it's because it felt like an application of the things you were already studying and doing. And maybe like conversely, you also learned things through poker that you could apply to decision making and to decision science as well?
Yeah, so I think what happened was that poker made me a much better intuitive cognitive scientist. That doesn't mean that all the intuitions that I have are right, but it led me to, I think, some really interesting problems. So, like, here's an example. The kind of like centerpiece of thinking in bets is about this problem, which is called resulting. Um, and that more broadly sort of fits into this in a noisy environment, meaning there's volatility, there's just luck, right, that can
Yeah.
cause an outcome, and then hidden information. So you're sort of making decisions without all the information you need to be able to make a perfect one. In those environments, it can become very hard to close feedback loops in a clean way, right? So like you can think about like if you play a game of chess, you can go back and you can analyze all the moves, right? So
Yeah.
because the pieces are only moving by an active skill and you can see where they all are.
Yes.
So you can analyze all the moves and you can close those feedback loops really cleanly because I can know like, did that increase my win probability? Did it decrease my win probability? And that's like neat. It's neat. You can tie that up in a bow. But once you start to inject luck into the equation, cognitively, it becomes very hard for us. So we can think about a chess-like game that adds luck into it, which would be backgammon, where I can still see all the person's pieces, right? I can see the checkers, but there's dice.
Yeah.
So I can actually go back and sort of calculate the win probability on those moves, but without sort of the math of it all, it actually becomes very easy for me just to say, to say, oh, luck got involved or my opponent got lucky or whatever. Like it just makes that problem harder.
Yeah.
And then we can now take the next step to poker, which is I can't even see my opponent's cards and there's luck, right? And in those types of environments, which poker really maps the best onto the types of decisions that you make in life of those three games, closing feedback loops just becomes very difficult. And what I found in the cognitive science literature was that there were these biases that had been identified, outcome bias being one of them, which is what I call resulting.
Yeah.
And then self-serving bias. But I feel like they weren't given a lot of attention. Like they weren't sort of considered like the sexier biases. Like sunk cost is a very sexy bias, right? And you can certainly see sunk cost at the poker table. You know, once you're losing, you won't fold, right? That's just sunk cost. But it was this intuition that I had from having played so many hands of poker that outcome bias, that resulting and the self-serving bias problem were actually a humongous problem for learning.
Yeah.
And that's what caused me to really focus on it. So I think that what ended up happening was that because I had had experience in this application where people were making a lot of decision errors because of the uncertainty, I got focused on some biases that didn't necessarily get a lot of focus from other people.
Yeah. I love the definitions you gave. So basically, resulting, it means to you judging decisions by outcomes rather than the quality of the decision itself, the quality of the process.
Exactly, which you can do in chess.
Yes.
So you can do that in chess because there's no uncertainty, right? If we play a game of chess and you win, I made worse decisions than you did, right? Even if I made lots of good decisions but one really big error. On average, I just made worse decisions than you do. And nobody needs to see the game to know that. All they need to know is that you won. That's it.
Yeah.
But that's not true in poker, right? In poker, if you win, I don't know, was it because you made good decisions? Was it because you got lucky? I would have to actually watch the hands. Like I'd actually have to see you play the hands in order to know. And it's the same thing with backgammon where there's luck. If I only know the outcome, you won a game of backgammon. That's all I know. I don't know why, right? I don't know if you made good decisions. I don't know if you got lucky. I don't know what the reason is without having seen it. And the error that we make is that we tend to treat things like we treat everything like chess. We just sort of background the fact that there's this uncertainty that exists. And we'll assume if someone has a good outcome that they played well. And if someone has a bad outcome, they must have made bad decisions. And you can see that in business all the time, right? It's like when a salesperson crushes their number, they think they were great. The leadership will be like, that person did great. When they miss the number, they're like, they must have done bad things. And then they put them in a room and they have a postmortem to try to figure out how they screwed up. It's like,
Yeah.
but you don't
Yeah.
know that, right? You have to go so much deeper than that to be able to figure it out. But we make this mistake all the time, and it really makes it very hard. It's an impediment to learning. It's an impediment to actually figuring out, like, you have to figure out why things happened in order to increase the probability that better things happen in the future. And if we don't close those feedback loops well, we're not, that's actually going to be an impediment to that.
Yeah, I love how you talk about feedback loops because it's a concept we discuss many times in engineering, in management, in a lot of parts of our work. I think one of the problems in decision making, other than not having all the information and so having this bias of resulting, is also that many times these feedback loops are very slow, are long. It takes a lot of time to figure out how something went. And so if I had to draw an analogy to poker, it's like you play very few hands. And so you don't have an easy way to evaluate your process or your decision process, as opposed to a situation where, like in poker itself, you play many hands, so you can adjust, you can improve your process in an easier way. I don't know if that feels right to you.
Okay, so there's kind of two things that I would say to that. And I love that you asked that question, because when I first talked to, so when Thinking in Bets came out, there were several venture funds that reached out to me. And all of them said the same thing that you just did, right? So they were like, well, is it really like poker? Because when you invest in an early stage company, it takes 10 to 15 years to know the result. And in poker, you know the result right away. And so you can close those feedback loops so much faster. So there's two things that I say to that. The first is, what do you mean that you find out right away in poker? Because most of the hands that you play at the professional level, you don't ever actually get to see your opponent's cards. So,
Right.
yeah. So I think there's data. I hope I'm getting this right. That at the top levels of the game, you see your opponent's cards 11% of the time. Now that's not true at the bottom part of the game. Like at the lower part of the game, you'll see your opponent's cards over half the time. But 11% of the time, you see the cards. So like 90% of the time, you're like, was I supposed to fold there? I'm not sure. I don't know. They could have been bluffing. And so the feedback loops are not nearly as clean as you think they are. While they might be fast, right? Like I'm winning or losing hands pretty quickly. The why of it is really hard if I haven't seen my opponent's cards, right? And I'm mostly not seeing those. So it takes more time than you think.
Yeah.
But certainly not 15 years. I'm going to get the feedback quicker, but I do want to just point that problem out.
Yeah.
But the more important point is I just completely reject the idea of long feedback loops. I just reject it. And the reason for that is that it's not like you make a decision and then you go into a coma and then you wake up 10 or 15 years later and you find out how it turned out. There's all sorts of things that are happening in between. And while they may not be sufficient to get you to a good outcome, they are necessary. So I'll give you an example from venture. When you invest in a company at seed rather. So the seed, earliest stage for institutional capital, really. When you invest in a company at seed, yes, it's true that you're not going to know, what is that company IPO for? You're not going to know what that company is exited for 10 or 15 years. You don't know if it's, going to die for quite a long time. You don't know if it's going to get acquired for quite a long time. But here's the thing you do know. Did it fund at Series A? Like this, there's so much more you can know, but this is the simplest thing because it's a gate.
Yeah.
So when you ask large venture funds, how many companies have you ever invested in that exited for over $1 billion that didn't fund at the next round? they'll be like, there was this one like 8 years ago, I
Yeah.
mean, pretty much all of them need to fund it the next round because they're on a venture track,
Yeah.
right? So how quickly are you getting from seed to Series A?
Yeah.
12 to 16 months. So yeah, is that slower than poker? Sure. Is it a decade? No.
It's not a
And
decade.
even
Yeah.
in that 12 to 16 months, there's all sorts of things happening. Like, are they achieving product market fit? Are they, is their revenue increasing or decreasing? So on and so forth. I mean, there's so many things that you can know about what's going on. And the analogy to poker is that it's not just did I win or lose the hand. There's all sorts of things that are happening in between that final result of winning or losing the hand that have to do with, like, do I raise? Do I call? How's my opponent acting? Like, there's so many bets that are occurring in between, and each of those are signal
Yeah.
for what the quality of the decision is, the decision that you made before that, in terms of what you're finding out along the way. And I think that that's just how you have to treat stuff.
Yeah.
It would be like saying, like, did I make a good decision to marry when, 25 years in, you get divorced? Does that
Yeah.
make the decision to get married bad? What? I don't know. No, could be. But just because you got divorced doesn't mean that it was a bad decision, right? Like, there's all sorts of things that are happening in between. So, so I just reject the idea that feedback loops can even be particularly
Yeah.
long.
Love this framing. So basically, if I have to turn it into advice, that would be we have to chase short feedback loops. And when it
Yeah.
seems that something is a too long feedback loop, we should look for checkpoints and things in between that give us signal about the fact that the decision is going the right way or the wrong way.
Right. And the way that you can think about it is that there are things that are necessary but not sufficient
Yeah.
that must occur along the way. There are benchmarks that you can
Yeah.
hit. There are gates that have to be opened, or and you have to identify what those things are. So I think that exactly what you just said, like, you have to chase the feedback loop. You have to decide. You have a lot of control over how long that feedback loop is going to be. And it's a really big advantage if you're not just throwing your hands up and saying, I'm not going to know anything for 10 years. And if you're someone really trying to say, what is the shortest signal? What is the signal that's going to come in the soonest? That's going to
Yeah.
start to tell me something. And that doesn't mean, what it could mean is that if you see that signal, you go from the chances of success being 25% to 35%. Like, you may still be a favorite to fail, as an example, but you've increased the probability you're going to succeed. And in general, you want to be making decisions that are heading you on that path, right?
Yes.
So the thing that I love about the folks over at First Round was that I'd had some conversations with other funds. One of the objections was the one that you just gave, like, oh, but it's not like poker, the feedback loops are really long. The other objection I had was that, well, power law applies here, right? There's such a small number of the companies in your portfolio that are generating all the returns that you can't actually find anything. The answer to that is exactly the same, but that's not true. Like, you're looking for the things that are increasing in probability that they're going to do well, right? That's what you're trying to do. And you'd prefer to be investing in, if you invest at Series A, you'd prefer to be choosing things that fund at Series B than not, even if those things don't end up exiting, because that gets you, moves the ball forward, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so, I gave those answers to a few of those funds, and they were just like, no,
Yeah.
no.
Love this.
I have a theory about why, if you want to go into it, but they were just like, no. And then I talked to Josh Koppelman over at First Round, and he was like, yes. And we've been working together now for over 6 years.
Yeah.
And I just love that, in particular about that fund, because I think it's very hard to break through and ask somebody to change what they're doing when they're so successful.
Part of the
And it goes to
bias.
this idea of, like, success doesn't mean that you're as successful as you could be. That's true
Yeah.
for all of us, right? So what I love about the folks over at First Round is that they're hungry for that extra, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not just like, no, we totally know what we're doing because we're so successful. We're like, we want the extra. We want to know what we can do in order to up level. And the way that I think about it is I've had a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm doing so great in the market, and it's like, well, okay, so what did you return last year? And it turns out that it was like below below what the market would have returned if you just indexed it.
They didn't even
But
know.
because they were better than zero,
Yes.
they didn't realize that they ought to be chasing more, right? And I think that that's kind of like that a lot of people get into that situation where they've been successful. And once they're successful, they're not hungry. They're not
Yeah.
hungry to figure out, yeah, but how could I up level from here? And I
Yeah.
just always really admire people who have the humility to say, maybe there's more.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think we have covered so far some parts of what I mean, we started with what resulting is and the fallacies and the biases. And you have talked about instead elements that make for good decisions, right? So chasing feedback loops, good signal. So you work with the fund, you coach founders. So what goes into a good decision making process? What are the elements that for you work towards good decisions?
So, okay. All right. So interesting. So the first thing is kind of a meta skill,
Mm,
which is what type of a decision am I facing? Is this one that deserves a lot of effort, or is this one that doesn't deserve a lot of effort? Um, People actually don't pause to evaluate that question very much.
yeah,
And that's really a very important question. And the answer to that question really has to do with evaluating what is the long term impact of this decision going to be? And how easy is it for me to change my mind, right? To sort of get out of it, to reverse it. And the reason for that is that when you go fast, you're just much more likely to introduce error into the decision. And if you introduce error into the decision, uh, what comes along with that is that you can be increasing the probability that you get an undesirable outcome.
yeah,
So if the decision you're making doesn't have a lot of impact in the long run, it shouldn't matter to you very much if you're introducing error. So you should go fast.
yeah,
Uh, the other way to mitigate that, like that impact, is to be able to quit something. So you can go fast if when you start something, you can quit it really easily at low
yeah,
cost, right? Because then if you start to see, oh, I'm getting a bad outcome, you can just stop what you're doing. So I always think about this like the intern versus the CEO problem, right? If you hire an intern and you don't hire the best one of the bunch, that doesn't really matter.
yeah,
But if you're hiring a CEO, it really does matter. So you have to sort of take a step back to start and say, what type of decision is this? And we actually get this question wrong a lot, right? You'll have people who take forever to order off of a menu
yeah,
when
yeah,
that's going to have no, like, it's not even going to tick your happiness up or down over the course of a year. But they'll hire like a really key hire by feel,
mm,
right? Like they had a great lunch with someone and then they're hiring them, and it's like, okay, that seemed fast. So we often get that reversed because I think people don't actually have the mental models to say, how
mm,
do I actually manage that speed question? So that's kind of step one of a really good
yeah,
decision process, or the first principle. The second principle of a really good making process is that you, assuming that you're taking your time, right? Assuming that we've gotten past that first question, is that you really need to make the implicit explicit. And what
mm,
that means is that we make a lot of decisions sort of by feel or by gut,
mm,
because we sort of, particularly with experience, we sort of develop these models, particularly of repeated decisions, but we don't make them explicit. So this happens in investing a lot, where people will, I actually had some people say to me, not First Round, but I had some people say to me, oh, I just know a good founder when I see one. And it's like, well, okay, maybe, but maybe we should make that explicit. What do you mean by that? Like, when you're looking at a good founder, like, what does that mean? What are the qualities of a good founder? What are the signals that you're looking at? So on and so forth. And you just do better when you make that stuff explicit. And there's a variety of reasons why that makes it better. One is that often when you make things explicit, you realize it makes no sense. So that's always good. It allows other people to view what you're doing and challenge it, which is really
Yeah.
important because your process is probably relatively biased and they may have another point of view. And if they're really smart, you want to know where their point of view is different
Yeah.
than yours, because that helps you increase accuracy. When you make it explicit, it makes it harder for you to narrativize, right? In other words, like, let's imagine that you meet with a founder and you really want to invest in them. You're going to tend to highlight the good stuff and low
Yeah.
light the bad stuff. But if you've got this explicit model that's like written down, you can't, it makes it harder for you to do that anymore, because you sort of have to think about them on all the dimensions that you've now made explicit. And then the other thing that making it explicit does is it does make it easier to close feedback loops, because otherwise what happens is that we sort of make a decision by like gut or feel, and then after the fact, yeah, you get some outcomes, and then you misremember, or you can't remember, or you don't really know what you were thinking about or what signals you were picking out
Absolutely.
when you made the decision. So make the implicit explicit. That's sort of this next
Uh,
thing that you want to do.
can I add one benefit that is
Yeah,
makes it easier to delegate work as well? You know,
for
if you had to
sure.
hand off your work to another person, to a coworker, it's mandatory basically
Yeah,
that you make.
actually, and it's actually a great mentoring tool, because
Yeah.
I can now, if you want to know what my model is of investing or choosing a project or whatever it might be, it's now explicit for you. So you can see how our firm or how our team actually thinks about it. So which is another benefit. All right, so we've got figure out if you should take any time with it, make the implicit explicit. Then the next piece is quantify your qualitative opinions. This is very
Hmm.
important. So I don't. So let's imagine. Um, I'll just stick with the sort of venture world here. Imagine that you're thinking about a company and you're trying to talk about the quality of the market. So you've made it explicit that the quality of the market matters. You may have like some very things that define what a good market quality is, um, like the competitive landscape or something like that. But we're just judging market. What will happen generally in conversations with people like, I think this is a great market.
What
It's
does it
like,
mean?
okay, but what does that mean? What do you mean by great? So what do I mean by quantify those qualitative opinions? Well, on a scale of 0 to 10, how good do you think this market is? And what this allows us to see is that, like, Luca, you might think it's a 9, and I might think it's a 6. And we were both described that as a great market, except we don't. We actually have a very
Yeah.
strong disagreement about that, right? So when we quantify our opinions, again, it forces us into a place of more accuracy, because uh, we're not using words that have a very broad target area in terms of their meaning. So we have to say what we mean precisely now.
Yes.
You can give a rationale for that, right? Give me 3 to 5 sentences about why you gave it a 6. That's
Yeah.
good. You want to record that as well. Um, but it's that quantification that really matters, because it allows us to both really be precise about what our opinion of something is, but also to discover more dispersion among the group, right? Because what we actually really care about is finding out where smart people disagree. That actually allows us to really improve our decision making quality. And it's in the disagreement that you get all the gains in accuracy. And so you need to be able to see that, and you can't do it if you're just saying, I think it's great, or I don't
Yeah.
like it. It's like, okay, but how much don't you like it? Give me a quantification. And then you can also do like forecasts, right? So like, if you're project planning, uh, you know, how long do you think this is going to take? What's the lower bound? What's the upper bound? What are the conditions
Yeah.
under which you're going to hit the lower bound? What are the
Yeah.
conditions under which you're going to hit the upper bound? What's your rationale for that point estimate? Those kinds of things. So you always want to have some sort of free writing that's like, this is the why, but you need
Yeah.
that quantification, like
Yeah.
70 days, right? And
Yeah.
then lower bound, whatever. So that's the next.
Can I ask you
Sure.
one question? Because you made the example, I think it's a great example about how good the market is. And you said, let's simply use a scale from 1 to 10, right? So
Yeah.
not necessarily super precise, because I think we have a bias that sometimes we restrain from measure our qualitative opinions because we feel like we are not able to get precise enough, right? But I feel that
Sure.
sometimes it's good enough just, to even to use a rough scale. It's a signal anyway, to get to move past the purely qualitative step
Yeah. I
of
mean,
the
I
thought.
think what I would say about that is that while you might be afraid to say it explicitly, it's happening under the hood anyway.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Like if you're thinking about whether you're going to invest in something, you are somewhere you're quantifying what you think the quality of the market is, right?
Yeah.
Is this a top 10% market? Is it a top 30% market? If you're trying to decide, you know, as you're a project manager, somewhere in there you're in your head you have an estimate of how long it's going to take and what the lower bound is and upper bound is and
Yes.
what the conditions of those things are. We don't like to give those precise answers because we're afraid then we'll be wrong.
Yeah.
But what does wrong mean? Like the whole point is that I think from my perspective, this is why I think this market is a 6.
Yeah.
Okay, then you're going to learn new stuff after the fact. That's just the fact of decision making under uncertainty. You will always learn new things after you make a decision or after you make a judgment. It doesn't mean that the initial judgment was wrong. It doesn't mean it's right. It means from your vantage point, given what you knew at the time, this was your best estimate of what you thought that quality was. And as you make lots and lots and lots of judgments like that, um, and you start to get results, you can now close that feedback loop and start to make those judgments even better
Yeah.
as you start to close those feedback loops. And that's what we ought to want to be doing. I'm That doesn't mean that if I give it a 6, that every single market I give a 6 to is going to be a 6. It's my best guess.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of things. But it's really important if I give it a 6 for me to know you gave it a 9. Why do you think that? Why
Yeah.
do you think it's so much better than I do? And let's have a discussion about that, right? And like let's be really excited about that. Not expecting us to agree, but just expecting us to explore. I want to understand why you think what you do. You want to understand what I think what I do. And then we're going to improve our decision quality in the moment through that process. So I think that people get caught up in thinking it's like 2 plus 2 equals 4. And what if I answer 7 and then I'm going to
Yeah.
get a bad grade? It's like,
Yeah.
but this isn't like this. This is forecasting, right? We're doing this under uncertainty and trying to make these judgments, and we're making the judgments anyway. So let's just make them explicit. You can't decide when you're going to leave for work if you don't make an explicit forecast of how long it's going to take you to get there.
Yeah.
But people are afraid to say it out loud because what if it takes 10 minutes longer?
Yeah.
Then people are like, oh, you got it wrong. It's like, no, you didn't. You made your best guess. So, yeah, so that's where I go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this comes because there is psychological complexity because of the fact that these decisions happen in groups and in teams, together with other people. So as you said, there might be something that we are afraid to say out loud, right? Or to expose ourselves to other people. So I wanted to ask, do you have advice about making good decisions in group settings, in a team setting, as opposed to just purely as if it was making a decision on our own?
So that's actually getting into the next step that I was, so
Yeah,
this is good.
perfect.
You have
Yeah,
led me to the promised land, which is
yeah,
great. So I think that you're right. I mean, I think a lot of people are just sort of afraid to say something out loud. Like, what if they disagree with someone else, or what if someone
yeah,
else thinks they're stupid, or whatever? So, okay, so we've got decide whether you should take time on it. If you should
yeah,
take time on it, let's make the implicit explicit. Let's say what we mean precisely, right? Let's quantify our qualitative opinions with some some rationale that's associated with that judgment. And then here's the last thing is get the opinions of the people in the group independently of each other. And the reason why you want to do that is for all the reasons you just said, right? If I'm giving my opinion independently, I don't know that you disagree with me.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't know that I disagree with you. So you're much freer to just give your opinion. And then what you find out is that once you see what everybody in the group thinks, you find out that everybody has a different opinion about it. So, first of all, you're going to maximize that dispersion of opinion, which you really, really want to do, right? That becomes really good for the culture of the team because the team now gets excited that people disagree with each other instead of getting afraid of it. Because that's what's happening is that people don't like to speak up because they're afraid of that disagreement. But when you do it this way, it's like you find out like, well, everybody thinks something different. So this is totally normal.
It's more data.
Yeah. And then, so that normalizes that. And then the discussion is driven around that. And this is really important is that once you've discovered those opinions and you find out you think it's a 9 and I think it's 6, we're not, when we discuss it, we're not doing it in a coercive way. It's coercive if I'm arguing with you, if I'm debating you and I'm trying to make you believe me, right? Like to come to my side. That's coercive and that stops people from wanting to speak up because they're afraid of, being debated with or being told they're wrong. A really good group decision, you're going to discover that everybody disagrees with each other. And then all you're going to do is have each person convey why they believe what they do. And then other people can ask questions through the lens of trying to understand. So I can say, so I think you're saying this. I'm curious what you think about this.
Yeah.
That's it. And we're not coming out to try to agree with each other, right? That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to explore that decision space. And what that allows people to do is just like privately express their opinions, find out that lots of people disagree with them, acknowledge areas of agreement, explore the areas where people disagree, and don't force people into agreement by the end of the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. Do you think that this first step of collecting opinions individually is like necessary in a context where there is less psychological safety, but then you can like overcome this and at some point maybe collect all the information in a group setting anyway? Or do you think it's always good to act that way?
I don't think anybody should ever elicit any information that matters in a group setting. Ever.
Love this.
Like never. If it doesn't matter, I don't care. Again, that goes back to that first question, right? Does it really matter? No.
Yeah.
Right? But if you're hiring a CEO, yeah. Right? If you're exploring different options for projects that you might pursue, yeah. You get the information independently. It's just such a vast improvement to decision making. I mean, we can think about, there's so many biases that can really addle our decision making that have to do with other people being around us. I mean, we have enough of our own biases as it is, like confirmation bias. But here's a really good one, anchoring. So let's imagine that we're a group of lawyers and we're trying to figure out what we should offer as a settlement number, right? So we're trying to settle a lawsuit. The data will prove this, but I'm sure your intuition will get you there too. Imagine that the first person says, well, I think we should offer $1 million. And then in a whole other world, the first person says, I think we should offer $10 million. Do you think that those two groups are going to land on the same number?
No.
No.
No way.
There's not in a million years. The first group's going to be closer to 1 million. The second group is going to be closer to 10 million.
Yeah.
Now, it might end up being, 7 versus 3, right? Or 6 versus 4. But that's a significant difference in terms of what you're offering. That's a huge difference, right? So that's called anchoring bias.
Yeah.
So the first thing that gets thrown out is going to anchor you. We know that. Very strong bias. The second thing is we could imagine we're brainstorming ideas. the first person throws something out, what's everybody going to do? They're going to start talking about that idea.
Yeah.
There might be amazing other ideas in the group that you're not going to hear because you're just talking about the first one that gets thrown out. So if you're going to brainstorm, have everybody write down like their craziest ideas first. Then you can send those out. You can have people like rank them, right? You just send out a list. Here's all the ideas people had. Rank these, rank your top 5, give a rationale for why. Now you can come up with sort of like across the group, what are the 10 best ideas? And then you can send those back to people, have them force rank them, and then have a
Yeah.
conversation about the brainstorm, right? Like that's just going to be better.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole problem of influence, right? Like if I'm a junior partner in an investment firm and I think it's a crappy market and the managing partner's like, this market's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
it's not even that I'm going to be afraid to disagree with them. I'm going to be persuaded.
Yeah.
Like it will change my mind. And then, but maybe
Yes.
maybe I saw something that nobody else saw. Like,
Yeah.
don't you want to find that out?
I think even in the best setting, I mean, under the best psychological safety you can think of, you are getting, I mean, your opinion is getting altered anyway. There's no way
Without you
around that.
knowing it. Exactly.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
so we think about this issue of like people don't want to disagree with leadership.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree, right? That's bad. And I always think it's funny because I'll see leaders be like, here's option A, here's option B. I want to go with option A. Here's all the reasons why. But feel free to disagree with me. Tell me why I'm wrong. It's like, ha ha ha, that's very funny. Um, but so there's that problem, right? Like people are afraid to speak up if a senior person or a subject matter expert, the boss, um, that's true. But there's this other problem which you just pointed out, Luca, which is you're the way you're thinking is changing also
Yes.
without you realizing that that's happening. So by getting that information up front, right, like independently and up front, you're getting the information out from under the influence of what's happening in that group, right? Whether it's anchoring, whether it's wagoning. And by the way, it also happens to solve the problem of I don't want to disagree with the boss. It solves that other problem as well.
Yeah, totally agree. So far we've talked about decision making in general. Now I wanted to ask you about one specific type of decision because you wrote about this in your latest book, which is about quitting. And I wanted
Oh,
to ask
okay.
you this because I'm a former founder, so in a way I come from that kind of
Never give
startup
up.
slash Silicon Valley mentality. You have never to give up and so on. So why do you think quitting is an underrated skill, and what's the difference between good quitting and simply giving up when you shouldn't instead?
Yeah. By the way, secret. Um, uh, Investors actually like it when founders return the capital.
Yeah.
Like I know that founders don't think that, but it's true. Um, they'd prefer to get the capital back than just have it run into the ground if the founder, who's
It's still
probably the
above
best
average
judgment,
anyway.
right? It's like,
Yes.
and particularly in a situation where like founders don't give up. So if a founder's returning the capital, they really ought to be because it's not going anywhere. And those types of founders often get invested in later because it's such an unusual thing to do, and
Yeah.
people get really impressed by that. So people should realize that. Um, so here's why quitting is such an underrated skill. So we've been talking about this idea of decision making under uncertainty, right? And we sort of
Yes.
went from chess to backgammon to poker. We added in luck, and then we added in hidden information. And you'll recall I said something, right? Which was, it's just a fact of life that you're going to find out new stuff after you make a decision, right?
Yeah.
So I said that sort of as a throwaway line, but now let's bring that line to the forefront, right?
Yeah.
When we make decisions, we are neither omniscient nor do we have a time machine. So what I mean by that is that I can't see my opponent's cards, right? Like I don't know everything that I need to know, and we all know that because we all say things like, oh, I wish I had known that, when I made the decision in the first
Yeah.
place, right? We say things like that, like we can feel the influence of that. And then the time machine problem is that, like, even if I did have all the facts, I still don't have a time machine to see which path I end up on, right?
Mm.
In other words, I can make a perfect decision, like perfect in terms of I have perfect information. I've maximized the probability that I get a good outcome. But there's always still some probability that I don't,
Yeah.
right? Like, think about it this way. I can follow all the rules of the road. I can go the speed limit, so on and so forth, and go through a green light, and I can still get in an accident.
Yeah.
That's a time
Perfect
machine
analogy.
problem, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So, given that problem, I'm not omniscient. I don't have a time machine. Such a bummer. What more important skill could you have than the ability to quit what you're doing? In other words, you make a decision under the conditions of uncertainty. Afterwards, you find out new stuff. Sometimes that new stuff is going to be like, ooh, I wish
Yeah.
I had known that then. Or, ooh, the world doesn't seem to be going in a way that I really like. And then you know what you get to do? You get to stop. And think about how hard decision making would be if you didn't get to do that. Like, what if the first person you dated you had to marry and you never got to get divorced?
Yeah.
Like, that would be a bummer, right? So
Yeah.
it's this incredible gift, right? That when you're climbing up a mountain and a blizzard comes in, you can turn around,
Yeah.
right? And here's the thing, though, that is so frustrating, and the reason why I wrote a whole book about it is that people don't turn around.
Yeah.
They don't, because they associate it with like failure and like a lack of character and like all this stuff. And so you have movies about people climbing up Everest, and then you know, they're too slow and the weather's really bad and a blizzard has come in and blah, blah, blah. And then they're dead on the mountain
Yeah.
because they don't turn around under circumstances that they ought to. And I think that we all have been in situations where I imagine that everybody's in a situation like this at this moment, where thinking about it, you would say to yourself, well, if I knew that this was how, like, this was the state that I was going to be in, I wouldn't have started it in the first place.
Yeah.
And yet here you are.
Yeah. No,
Here
but
you are.
I completely agree, and I think, and by the way, this applies to pretty much everything in life. We talked about companies,
Yeah.
marriages, projects inside your team, and it's one of those things that I think if you talk about this with anybody, everybody agrees, right? But then it's so hard because sunken cost, social pressure, all the kind of things that you have said. So how do you make this easier for people on a psychological level? Do you have to, as you talked about mapping out the journey, do some prep in advance, thinking about the various failure modes, or when you are in the moment, how do you talk yourself out of the situation you're in?
Um, so so here's the thing. There's a couple of things in here that I just want to say about this topic. The first is that the way that we think that people are going to react is very different than the way that they actually react. And there's science, I'm blanking on the author of this paper that actually just came out that showed that people don't stop because they think they're going to be judged. It's one of the main reasons. They think they're going to be judged poorly, except they're not. They don't get judged poorly. And that's sort of what I was saying about investors like it if we return the capital to them. Like, I think your family and friends like it when you turn around on Everest, and they're not like, oh, you're such a failure because you didn't get to the summit, right?
Yeah.
But that's what we think is going to happen. So a lot of this is like the way that we're processing that information is just like kind of getting that sort of external like vision, right? Like wrong. How are people going to view me? Which I think is important just to note. The second thing that I think is really important is that you can't talk yourself out of it. You can't talk yourself out of cognitive biases. This is the way your mind works. I mean, this is hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. And the fact is that when we think about biases and heuristics, right, the word heuristic just means a shortcut. And shortcuts work most of the time, except when they don't.
Yeah.
And so, anything that's happening is like there must have been some sort of advantage to it, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. So I think that what happens is that people kind of think like, well, if I know about a bias, then I won't do it, right?
Yeah.
Like if I know about confirmation bias, I won't have that problem. If I know about the sunk cost fallacy is one of the big offenders that causes us
Yeah.
not to quit things, right? Like, but if I quit now, then I'll have wasted everything I already put into it. It's like, okay, well, wait, what about the stuff you're about to waste, right?
Yeah.
So we sort of think like, well, if I've read Thinking Fast and Slow, which sort of like is a
Yes.
compendium of biases, then I'm not going to do it anymore. And it's not true. But then the next thing people will say is, well, I'm going to think my way out of this. And so I've had people say to me before, like, well, what I do is every Monday I go in and I imagine, what if I didn't have these stocks in my portfolio? Would I buy them today? And it's like, nope, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. It will make you more confident in the decision, which I think is net bad if it's not improving the decision quality. So you can't just like sort of like Jedi mind trick it, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna do this thought experiment and then things will be fine. That's just not the way that this works. You have to really start to say, how do I create processes, some of which are pretty brute force, that are going to allow me to be better at this, right? So if I want to reduce the influence of confirmation bias, then I ought to make my models explicit and elicit information from the group independently, because you're going to discipline my bias, right? It's a way for you to discipline my bias. Then the other thing is that because I have this explicit rubric that I have to fill out, it makes it harder for me to do all of that kind of narrativizing, and it's going to make my opinions less biased. On the quitting side, you can do things that are like really hard stops. So a stop loss would be an example of something that's relatively brute force, right? Which would just be like, I own this stock at 50. If it gets to 40, I've already put an order in to sell it. That's called a pre-commitment contract. It's incredibly helpful. There's all sorts of ways that you can use these commitment devices. And so one of them would be, let's imagine that I'm working on a project. And I think about what those necessary but not sufficient things are that must occur in the future. And one of the ways that I can do that is I can say, imagine it's a year from now and things have gone really poorly. Looking back, there were early signals that I ignored, that things weren't going to go my way, right? So now you write those things down.
Yeah.
Right? There's a blizzard. Okay, right? Like one of them is I kept climbing when there was a blizzard. So you write those things down, and then those become gates, what I would call kill criteria. And then you use this commitment device. You say, okay, if I see that signal in the future, then I must do something, right? Now, sometimes it stops. Sometimes it might be some sort of pivot. Sometimes it might be get new information. Best done if you have an accountability person, right? So if you, as a team, agree to these things, or you have somebody that will help you with it. So let me try to ground this to help. So I actually was working with a sales team, and this sales team had an ethic of never give up. And in fact, if they ever killed the deal themselves, they would get yelled at, basically. It's like, what are you doing? Why aren't you still pursuing this? Blah, blah, blah. But it's like, but that's really bad, because there's huge opportunity costs to a really good salesperson pursuing something that isn't going to close. Like they could be spending their time like in business development or pursuing deals that are more likely to close. So it was a very bad ethic. So I wanted to change that. So we sent out a prompt to all the ICs, and it was just this. Imagine you got a lead through an RFP or RFI, and you've been pursuing it for 6 months. and the potential customer has just told you that they're going in a different direction. Looking back, you realize there were early signals that that was going to happen. What were they? And so all the ICs like wrote this down independently, obviously, because this is a brainstorm. They wrote it down and we came up with all these signals. Here were 3 of them. So I can sort of give you an example of like, how would you use this in a pre-commitment device? So the first one was all the customer wanted to know about was price. That was it. It was a software as a service company. So they didn't want a demo. They didn't really want to know a lot about us. They just wanted to know what our pricing model was. We said, okay, so if you see that signal, what should you do? And they all agreed that you ought to kill there. Now notice that they're being asked in a hypothetical. So they're not trying to defend a situation. They're not having to close a deal at this moment. This is sort of very abstract for them. So they said, well, you should kill it. Like you shouldn't pursue it anymore because obviously they're just trying to beat somebody else down on the price. They don't even want a demo.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, great. And so that became a pre-commitment. If they only want to know about price and you're offering a demo and they don't want it, you're not supposed to pursue it anymore. So that was one. Another one was when I looked at the RFP or RFI, it was very clearly to me written with a competitor in mind. So we said, okay, so what should you do about that? And they said, well, I think that we should ask the potential customer directly if they're working with a competitor. If they're working with the competitor, we think that they are. And then, so notice it's not a direct kill, it's go get more information. And then that branched off depending on the information. You know, if they said yes, you'd say, how far down the road are you in the process with them? If they said no, you would continue to pursue, right? So that was a sort of decision tree that came out of that. And then the last one, they came up with a lot of them. This is just 3 of them. Was we've had more than 3 meetings and we haven't been able to get a decision maker in the room. Well, what do you want to do about that? Well, after the 3rd meeting, we're going to offer up executive alignment. And if they say no, then we're going to kill the deal. So you notice that this is all like, here is the signal. This is what we're supposed to do. And you're creating these pre-commitments. And then that becomes part of deal review now. So if I come to you as a sales leader, instead of you yelling at me because the deal is dead, I'm actually going to get yelled at if you say, okay, you're pursuing this deal and you're going through these things. Like, have you gotten a decision maker in the room? No.
Yes.
How many meetings have you had? 7. Okay, but what are you doing? Because this is part of our process, right? Yeah. And this will actually get you to start those, to start getting things out of the funnel more quickly. And you can apply this idea all over the place, right? Yeah. So it just helps you to get to that decision to pivot away more quickly. To your question about like, what's a bad quit? One where you're not doing any of these processes, right? Like if you're quitting because it's hard, that's a dumb reason to quit, right? Like hard doesn't cut it. It has to not be worthwhile. Like that's really what makes a good quit is it's not worthwhile. How do you figure out it's not worthwhile? Well, you go through that process where you're like, what are the signals that are going to tell me it's not worthwhile or maybe trending toward not worthwhile? And what am I going to do when I see them?
Yeah, I love this because I think there is a common thread also with all the things that we have talked about before. In a way, it's putting the attention on the process as opposed to the result itself, to the outcome. And the example that you made with the sales team is perfect. And I think it's also curious that in general, let's say management culture, there are many devices like the OKRs and many things that focus on defining what it means that something is going your way, that you are achieving some goal, but there is way less attention to exposing how and why and when things are not going well, right? I mean, failure mode, skill criteria that you mentioned, I love this word. And instead, you should expose this because of the process, right? To improve the process.
Right, exactly. And, I think that one of my favorite examples of like how our intuition goes so wrong on quitting and why we need these processes in place comes from a woman who ran the London Marathon in, I think it was 2019. So we all have this very strong intuition when things start to go wrong. Obviously, we're going to stop what we're doing. right? Like if we're climbing Mount Everest and a blizzard comes in, like I'm not going to keep climbing. If I take a job, remember you're taking that job with very little information, right? And also you don't know like what kind of personnel changes are going to occur, what's going to happen
Yeah.
in the economy, or there's all sorts of stuff that you don't have control. But so you take your job and like, let's imagine that you're the boss who you really connected with, like quits, and they're replaced by somebody who's like really toxic, right? And then you're not quitting your job. And if I asked you in advance, like, would you quit if your job, if your boss, you'd say yes. But now that you're in it, you're like, well, I need to stick it out. It's a sign of care. I don't even know what's going on in your head, but you stay.
Yes.
So one of my favorite examples is that, so this woman, Siobhan O'Keefe, she's running the London Marathon. And on mile 8, she breaks her fibula bone, breaks her leg.
Wow.
And the medical tent, she's in horrible pain. The medical tent's like, yo, Siobhan, you should stop running.
Yeah.
But she doesn't. She keeps going. She actually finished the marathon. A couple things about that. There were 3 other people in that marathon who did the same thing. And pretty much in every marathon, someone runs with a broken bone. So what's going on there? Well, first of all, I imagine like a lot of people hear that story and they're like, oh, she must be such a badass. I wish I was like that. It's like, no, you don't. She could have shattered her whole, like her leg was broken. She ran another 18 miles on that thing. Like she could have literally made it so that she couldn't run for like, she would need
Yes.
pins. So no, that is not a badass thing to do. Like, don't do that. That is dumb. But the other thing is that, like, I think it's pretty easy to realize that if you had said to Siobhan O'Keefe, like, hey, I'm a messenger from the future, and you're going to break your leg on the 8th mile, do you want to start this marathon? She would have been like, hell no. Like, why would I start this marathon if I'm going to break my leg on mile 8? And
Yeah.
also, if you had said to her, well, what do you think you're going to do if you break your leg on mile 8? She would say, I'm going to stop running.
Yeah.
But you don't
Yeah.
stop running. That's the problem. You don't
Yes.
stop running because you don't want to be seen as someone who gave up, or because you already started and like you've put in all the training and you don't want to waste the time and you're short of the finish line, and that just means you're a failure. So the thing is, for Siobhan O'Keefe, like if she had actually written down these kill criteria and like declared them to, like, what are the conditions under which I would stop running? One of them would be if the medical staff tells me I ought to.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing about our cognition that there's just a really big difference between kind of seeing one of these signals on the fly
Yes.
versus planning ahead for the signal. Because it's the same signal, right? Like in both cases, we're going to break our leg on mile 8. In one case, we're going to keep running. And in the other case, because we've pre-committed to it,
Yeah.
we're just more likely to stop. It doesn't mean that you're going to stop every time, but you're going to stop more than you would. And that really matters.
Totally agree. And I may add that in this case, it was kind of clear cut. There is a precise moment where something very bad happens, right? But in reality, it's often more like boiling frog, where things get worse and worse slowly, and you don't even realize that. And maybe if you can go back and read to a piece of paper something you had written that might be a kill criteria, then you realize all of a sudden, oh, I'm actually there. But you wouldn't have realized otherwise, because maybe over years, your relationship with your boss has gotten worse and worse. Your motivation has gone down and more down, but you don't even realize that because it goes so slowly.
Yeah, one of the things I love that was in what you just said, Luca, is that it's never too late to do kill criteria. It doesn't matter how deep into the process you are. It's great if you do it at the beginning, but even if you do it at the beginning, you should put it on a cadence anyway, because the world changes and you should be keeping up with that. But I've had a lot of times where someone's thinking about, should I stop something? And, they're obviously pretty deep into it. And the first question I always ask is, how long are you okay with the situation as it is? So one of the things that I found is that even if it's obvious that the person should quit today, generally they won't do it, and you shouldn't push them to. So it's always good to sort of allow someone to get away from the moment and get themselves into the future, which gives them some psychological distance, which allows them to see the situation more clearly. So just like, how long are you okay with the situation as it is? So let's say they say like, 2 more months. Okay, great. So I'll say, okay, it's 2 months from now, right? What is a good version of the world? What is a bad version of the world?
Yeah.
What has to have happened along the way to make it that this is worth continuing?
Love
What are the
this.
things that you're observing that would tell you that it's not worth continuing? So they'll do that. And to your point, a lot of times what people will say is, wait, the things that would tell me to stop are already here.
Yeah.
They've already occurred. Right. So I remember having a conversation with someone recently where they were like, I want to stop 2 months from now. And then we went through like, okay, it's 2 months from now. And what are the signals that tell you that you ought to quit? And they were writing, and they literally like, wait, most of this stuff happened like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So I should stop now. Right. And so that often happens. Right. So these signals that become so obvious when you can get yourself some psychological distance from it, so that you can sort of see it almost as as if you're observing yourself from the outside, all of a sudden become really clear. And these are things that have been occurring along the way that you've just been rationalizing or ignoring. And all of a sudden they just become boom, like right out in the forefront. And you're like, wait, they already happened.
Yeah. Totally. And I love that we talked about this because these are some of the most important decisions that we can make for our lives, professional, personal lives. Sometimes it's really hard. So having a framework and a good hygiene, about how to make them, it really matters. So thank you, Annie. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.